when hiring managers put together job descriptions, for the most part, they're kind of like a wish list.
Welcome to the Final Round podcast, where our mission is to help you knock out the competition and land your dream job.
Lizzie Ann Jones has been a recruiter at Amazon and Expedia for over 4 years, including MBA recruiting and global talent acquisition. She's a recruiting thought leader on LinkedIn, where she has gained over 8 million annual views on her career content. Lizzie is currently completing her MBA and is an incoming product marketing manager MBA intern at Microsoft. Here are some questions we will be answering. How to win as an underdog? What is it like to work at Amazon? The key trait to breaking into competitive development or rotational programs? What should your mindset be when recruiting for jobs? How to master networking calls and coffee chats? How to identify your strengths and weaknesses? How to overcome challenges in your life? And how can being an introvert actually be a strength? Let's dive in. Well, Lizzie Ann, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have you on the Final Round podcast. You've, recruited a couple amazing top tech companies. You're an incoming intern at Microsoft. So excited to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, AJ. Yeah, I've had an interesting career in tech, and I know that this is a space that a lot of people want to get into. So it's my pleasure to be able to do talks like this so I can give back some tips, hopefully some wisdom to help some of you listeners to break into big tech as well.
And I think the most interesting thing about your story is from afar, you would see a lot of victories, right? Microsoft, Expedia Group, Amazon, right? But what people don't realize is that you really have a true underdog story. And we recently interviewed a recruiter from Tesla who we were talking about it earlier, and she has an underdog story as well. And I think it's so important because a lot of people think that breaking into these top companies, you have to be such a perfect candidate and your parents have had to work there and everything has to line up. But a lot of times you come in as an underdog, right? And some things for your underdog story, you said that you grew up in a low-income household, first-generation college student, breaking into tech as a minority and from a non-tech background. So can you tell me how you were able to navigate around all these obstacles and still build on your career path that you've been building on and found all these successes in the last few years?
Yeah. So like you said it, I had probably all the cards stacked against me. I grew up poor. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. When I was in college, I was primarily studying occupational therapy. So I was wanting to go into the healthcare field. And it wasn't until like right around graduation when I wanted to make a pivot. So I didn't have like a business internship or anything at all. So yeah, I definitely have a non-traditional background, but I think the thing that helped me the most in the beginning and still to this day is just self-advocacy. I've never like had anything handed to me. I've always had to kind of like find resources and things on my own. So in college, like I was very much in the habit of documenting my successes, making sure anytime I achieved something in a club or in a job that I had that on my resume and that I was always like tweaking my resume. Like it was like a living, breathing thing because if I don't advocate for myself, I know no one else will. I didn't even have people who like went through the college or corporate recruiting process. And that really helped me in my first job out of college, which was at Amazon. And this is a very competitive company. I didn't have referrals. I didn't know anyone who worked at Amazon, but what I did have was an excellent resume, super metrics driven, super concise. I had been going over it like again and again, like way before graduation or applying. And then going to the interview process, again, I was just hustling super hard, having my parents help me do the interview prep because I didn't like know other professionals. So having that self-advocacy, I think was key in terms of getting to big tech and then also staying within that industry. And there are a lot of things that I've learned along the way in terms of self-advocacy, in terms of networking, using LinkedIn, personal branding that I didn't know about. And I wish I did. It would have made that process easier. And that's precisely why I love to give back in terms of career development and career tips and going on talks like this.
Well, it's such an amazing story. And I completely agree that self-advocacy is critical. And if you don't advocate for yourself, why should someone else advocate for you, right? And I think that's such a big thing going into the recruiting process with just so much confidence that you know that you can provide value at any company. It's just a matter of what company is the best fit. And you mentioned Amazon coming out of college. And I know that you specifically recruited for the MBA Leadership Development Program. And it's
Yeah.
so amazing that a lot of companies today, I had the privilege of being on one at Disney for a leadership development internship program. But a lot of companies are trying to look for aspiring leaders. And I'm curious to know if you can kind of describe this program as well as explain how important it is to be an aspiring leader trying to break into tech.
Yeah, so the rotational program at Amazon is really cool. They have them in a couple different functional areas from product management, to operations, to finance and marketing. So this is a program where they're expecting someone to come in, not as a specialist, but as a generalist, someone who has really good critical thinking skills, able to be a natural leader, able to have a lot of ownership for a project, and then you are able to go into this program and rotate into different functions, so into different business groups within a particular business, so that you can get a variety of experience up front. So having a diverse, level of experience is super helpful when you're in tech because it is an industry that changes a lot. So that is the goal of rotational programs, is that you're getting people who aren't specialists. They're coming in, getting exposed to a lot of different skill sets so they can either dive deep and find one that they really like or continue on to being a generalist. These programs are super helpful, I think, for people who just want a little bit more kind of a robust structure in terms of development. Can I actually answer that one again? I was
Yeah,
like, off.
yeah, absolutely. Do you want me to ask the question again, or do you want to just answer it again?
Yeah, if you could ask the question again, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
yeah, absolutely. So, we mentioned you were talking about self-advocacy, and I completely agree that if you don't advocate for yourself, then why should a recruiter or hiring manager advocate for you? And you said that your first kind of job out of college was at Amazon. And I know that you specifically recruited for a leadership development program for MBA students. So, what did you look for in terms of the ideal candidate for this leadership development program?
Yeah, so for Amazon's rotational programs, it's a pretty robust structure. So the first step is having a good resume, and that is something that like you have a lot of experiences that have transferable skills. So they're not looking for someone who is like a finance expert going into this like finance rotational program. It's someone who has really good critical thinking skills, analytical skills that has the potential to be trained up. And that's the whole point of rotational programs, is that you're getting people who have um, just innate skills that can be developed within a program. And these can be helpful for people who are joining tech out of undergrad or grad school, or career changers, because you have a little bit more structure there. With rotational programs, there's typically kind of a path from point A to point B in terms of you rotate into like two or three like job functions. You have like a mentor, you have a cohort of people who are doing the exact same thing. And that can be really helpful for people who are coming from an untraditional background into tech.
So I think that everyone wants to break into these really awesome rotational programs, leadership development programs. But what are you looking for in an ideal candidate that would be a good fit for a leadership development program?
I would say the top quality is seeing someone who's consistently shown initiative over time. So when you're looking at their work experience, even if it's not in a tech background, that you see over and over again that they've been leading projects, that they've been creating things, that they've been facilitating things, that whatever work environment they are in, that they're the ones who are like stepping up to make things happen, and they do that successfully again and again. That would be the biggest thing, because that is more of a softer skill. Leadership, it's something you can definitely cultivate, but it's different from learning like Excel or SQL, where you can take a class if you can figure it out, but becoming that person who will like step up in a situation and then lead others to do the same, that's a lot harder to teach. And that's something that is really special and what companies are looking for.
And it's interesting that you said consistency with taking initiative and being a leader. It's not just doing one thing off the bat, but it's doing multiple things throughout your life to build a theme throughout your application, your profile, your story. And that's the same thing actually that a recruiter that we had on the podcast from the Boston Consulting Group, he said the exact same thing, that we're looking for someone who can show initiative, but not just once, but over a longer period of time to prove a pattern. And I think, for myself, when I was on this Disney business leader rotation program, which I'm assuming it's probably pretty similar to the Amazon one, but just a different company, the main interview questions, the main talking points was, how have you showed initiative in the past? So everyone out there, I think try to, even if you don't want to be the president, just take more initiative than being just a member in a club or organization, and don't just show up, but set up the events, clean up the events, speak with the guests before all the members get there. And I think that the initiative is something where it's not necessarily just taught, but you have to go out and get it. So I think that's an excellent point in terms of who you're looking for these types of Amazon programs. And
Yeah.
then, talking about Amazon for one more second, it's been said that the years at Amazon are almost kind of like dog years because the environment is so fast paced, right? It's so cutthroat. And also the work that you probably accomplish in 1 year at Amazon is equivalent to maybe 7 years at a different company. So what was your experience like at Amazon? Was it an absolute grind? Did you learn a ton? What was that experience?
Yeah, it's super fast paced. It is a company that has its hands in a lot of different industries and it's constantly evolving. So you feel that as an employee. So yes, in my time there, I was there for 2 years and it definitely felt like a lot longer. Um, and that's what I loved about it. And that's what I was kind of looking for. I kind of wanted to be in a place where I was like drinking from a fire hose
Mhm.
and just learning as much as I can. I think that's super helpful, especially when you're young in your career and you don't know exactly what you want to do long term. Um, there were just times when I was at Amazon where like the way that we were running our operation at the beginning of the month was like 70% different by the end of the month because something happened and we just had to pivot really quickly. Or there's like this theme at Amazon where you don't launch something when you're 100% ready. You have to be like 70, 80% ready and then just figure out the rest. So there are times where we like run super fast in one direction. We're like, okay, we need to pivot and then just go in the complete opposite direction. So it was very challenging, but you learn so much in an environment like that. So I'm grateful that that was the first place I decided to start off in my career.
And I think that quote, and I've actually heard that quote before as well from Jeff Bezos, where he said that you don't launch something when you're 100% ready, but rather when you're 70 or 80% ready. Because if it's 100%, you wait too long, competitors come in and you're at a loss. And I think we can translate that to someone's recruiting journey. And I'm curious to know, do you think that you should only apply to an internship or a job or any opportunity out there where you feel 100% qualified and you check off every box, or rather 70, 80% qualified and you check off 75% of the boxes?
Yeah, definitely don't wait until you're just 100% ready because you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities. When hiring managers put together job descriptions, for the most part, they're kind of like a wish list. Like if I had my ideal candidate in the perfect situation, this is what they have. But then reality hits, and then you get people in front of you and you realize, okay, this person doesn't have, this one skill that I listed on the job description, but they have two more skills that I didn't list and are really helpful. So there is that flexibility there. And for that reason alone, you shouldn't wait until you find something that's 100% a good fit because you'll be limiting yourself. So yes, 70 to 80% is a good rule of thumb in terms of like that's kind of where you want to spend most of your time. And then if you saw something with like less than 70, 80%, it doesn't mean you can't apply at all, but it just means you want to just be strategic with your time and try to get the most of the qualifications. But if there are a couple missing, then it's still okay to apply.
I think that's such a great way to think about a job application, and that the HR managers essentially are making a wish list, not a requirement list, but a wish list and what, the ideal candidate would be like. But at the end of the day, most people don't check off every box, and most people who get the position don't check off every box. So I think it's a great way to think about it, and you should apply to more roles even if you're not 100% qualified. So I think that's a great way to look at it. And I understand that currently you are an MBA candidate, correct?
Yeah.
Awesome. And I know that for tech, there have been some pretty different viewpoints on if an MBA is required. I know Elon Musk is super big on saying that, MBAs are not required. I know for Amazon, it's probably a little bit different. But curious for your own career path, why did you get an MBA? And do you think it's required to really grow in these tech companies?
Yeah, the decision was definitely a personal one. So I spent the last 4 years in corporate recruiting. And although I loved it very much, I started a company on the side, a career coaching company called Hey Lizzie Ann. And in that process, I was constantly doing research to make sure my products are priced right, interviewing customers just to make sure that I'm getting the right information out to people. I was doing a lot with the website and the design. And I realized that a lot of the things that I was doing fell under the marketing umbrella and I loved it and I wanted to get a try at it. And when I started networking with other marketers and product marketers within tech, um, I knew that it was possible for me to pivot from recruiting to this other role if I wanted to, but it would take a bit of networking and a bit of time for that to happen. Whereas I know from working at Amazon, they have these rotational programs where you don't even have to have a marketing background before business school. Like business school is setting a lot of people up to kind of pivot. So I saw that as kind of like a more built-in system for me to pivot to a different company in a different role. Um, and so that was a big thing for me was just having kind of like a more structured path. And then the other thing was being able to network with different people. I know that tech is where I want to spend the rest of my career. Like there's no other industry for me. Um, most of my friends work in tech, so I'm constantly in this environment with the same kind of people thinking the same way, and I wanted to make sure that I had some time in my career to take a step back and be exposed to different positions. So I'm at Rice University in Houston, Texas, where the tech scene isn't super large. It's not like your Seattle. There are people who like they don't think Azure Cloud is like the coolest thing in the world, and like it's humbling because it's like you can be so immersed in this field that like everyone wants to go into. So having the time to kind of step back, meet people from different backgrounds, and then develop as for myself as a leader, I thought was worthwhile for 2 years. But for some people, it may not make sense. And at the end of the day, in tech, you don't necessarily need an MBA. Sometimes you don't even need a bachelor's degree to even like do the job. It's definitely going in that direction of like less formal education. So I would say there's no standard answer on like, yes, you need an MBA or no, you don't. That answer probably would have been different a couple years ago. But moving forward, I'd say just really take a look at your career and your journey, what makes sense to you.
So if someone's on the fence about getting an MBA, what would you say is the deciding factor to get one? Is it more so if you want to pivot from like you recruiting to actually being a marketing manager, or is it to grow within the same position that you're in? You know, what's the best way to think about it in terms of breaking it down in terms of what's the best decision?
Honestly, the big factor for a lot of people is the cost of an MBA. It is extremely expensive. So I think like that's the biggest thing is like, are you going to get the ROI that you're looking for by taking a step back and going to this career versus can you supplement getting a certification or just networking? So I would say cost is like a pretty big factor for a lot of people, to be perfectly honest. I know that's not like a super sexy answer, but that's usually what it comes down to for most people.
And it's interesting how, you know, the way that you understood why you want to get an MBA is actually through your own company, right? HeyLizzieAnn.com. And I have actually used this resource before. It's an amazing platform. And I love the page for the free resources. And you mentioned podcasts, you mentioned different influential speakers on LinkedIn. It's a great way to just collect more resources and also use you as a resource if we have any questions. So why did you start this platform and what's your mission behind it?
Yeah, it was very unintentional. So when I started working in recruiting, I began posting job search tips on LinkedIn because there was a lot that I was learning as a recruiter that I didn't know, and I wish I would have known as a graduating college student. And then unintentionally, I attracted a pretty large following for the career tips and content. And then it went beyond to people just not wanting content, but wanting to like work with me to like help them in their careers. So because there was that need for like a modern day career coach for people who maybe are a little bit more on the underdog side. That's why I decided to start a business out of it. And it's been awesome to be able to be with people on a one-on-one journey in terms of like helping them pivot into tech or like graduate from college and get a role in tech. It's the things that I did in my path, but I'm helping people get there a little bit faster, hopefully with a little bit less stress. And it's been a really awesome journey so far.
Well, I love the mission behind it, and especially how you're focused on helping early tech professionals. And obviously, your expertise is just something where it's an asset, and you have so much experience to share and help tailor to those students, young professionals. So I think it's an amazing platform. And I think it's something that's so needed today because a lot of people are struggling, whether it's something with COVID or whether it's something with getting a job rescinded or getting laid off, fired, or whatever it is. But I think that it's really interesting because I saw one of your posts on LinkedIn and that you were discussing that you had experienced a medical issue and going through the process of overcoming that. You were very vulnerable on LinkedIn. You were talking about every step that you took to get from where you were in terms of these very dark times now where you are today. So can you walk us through what your mindset was to get you through those darker times? Because as much as I'd love to talk about, the sunshine and rainbows that's going on, there are a lot of people out there that are so stressed and they're struggling, whether that's with recruiting or anything with COVID.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad that you asked it. So, in the past, I posted on LinkedIn, kind of like the triumph stories. If I was a first gen and then I went to college, I had a non-tech background and then I got into tech, the kind of after scene. And a lot of people like that of like seeing the person after they've overcome the struggle. And then this past summer, I had a medical incident that impaired my speech for a little bit. And it was right before I was going to be a keynote speaker at a Women in Tech conference. And my whole goal for that, the end of 2020, was that I would hopefully be invited to do a TED Talk. And then losing my ability to speak coherently and like not even knowing if that was ever going to come back again was really scary. And I knew that I had to like make a choice, like either just sit back and be scared and kind of deal with this on my own, or just like confront it head on so that this won't hurt me. And so that's why I decided to make a video and share my journey. And it wasn't after, I had gotten better, and I can tell that happy story was like right in the thick of it. And I think another part that kind of led to this was just the fact that we were in 2020 was such a weird year, and it was so weird that not a lot of people were sharing the struggles on social media. And I think more people should do that. And when I shared that story, so many people reached out to me sharing their personal stories of injuries or illnesses at the workplace and feeling like they had to like hide it because people might judge them or think that they're not as capable. So seeing how that empowered people while that was also empowering myself was an incredible thing. So it's something that I'm trying to lean into more as I go further in my career, because I know that there are people out there who probably had similar stories to me that want to be seen. But unless I'm using my platform to share that, even if it's uncomfortable for me, I'm not going to be able to uplift those people that I know I have the power to.
Well, it's truly an inspiration. And I know, I don't even know if I could do that to share your story. And it's easy to share your story once you got to the finish line, but to share your story when you're on mile 2 and you just maybe, rolled an ankle or broke your leg, and it's really tough and you're going through that journey. So it was such an amazing experience to kind of follow you. I feel like everyone who follows you on LinkedIn was following and supporting your journey throughout that process. And, kudos to you again for being able to share that story. And I think that, that same philosophy of having a strong mindset and getting through the darker times, a lot of people out there who are listening to this podcast and are still searching for internships or jobs, they keep seeing on LinkedIn that it says, I'm happy to announce, or I'm so excited or thrilled to say that I got this job at Google or Facebook or Microsoft, whatever it is, right? And they're in a dark mindset because all you see is everyone else getting something and you're not getting anything. Maybe you're getting constant rejection. So what would you say to those students and professionals out there who keep seeing those posts but have to continue to fight through it because maybe the opportunity is just waiting for them the following day?
Yeah, that is so tough. And that's why I create the content that I do. It's not always those types of posts because I understand how that affects someone. The job search process is really tough and it's so vulnerable at times. So to like go on this platform where you're trying to find resources and then it's kind of in your face, other people succeeding and you want to be happy for them, but at the same time, it sucks for you. Like that's such a real feeling. Um, and what I would say to those people is one, give yourself a little bit of grace. Like it's already hard enough. Like don't put yourself down for feeling that way about those posts. And you're not the only person who feels that way. Even those people who are making those announcements, they probably felt the same way that you do right now. Um, and I would say that in terms of a career, it kind of is like a Ferris wheel. There are times where you feel like you're at the bottom, but you have to understand like you are going to get up again. Like there's no alternative in terms of the job search process. It's not like you're never going to find a job for the rest of your life. That's not going to happen. Um, so I would say one is to just like understand that objective truth that you will find that opportunity in your future, in your path. And then two, be honest with like what you need at this point. If you find those types of posts motivating and it kind of pushes you a little bit, then by all means, like keep checking LinkedIn and keep following those things. If you feel like it's just making you feel a little bit down, then maybe try following some company pages or some hashtags on LinkedIn of other topics within your industry, things that are really useful for you to learn. But then so your newsfeed isn't just people like announcing different things. You can have a little bit of a balance there.
And I think another great analogy about recruiting is like being on a Ferris wheel. And sometimes you look up and you see people on the top of the Ferris wheel and you're on the bottom. But if you just are patient and you do everything that you need to do to maximize your chances, as in tailoring your resume, as in networking, reaching out to recruiters, reaching out to hiring managers, before you know it, once the Ferris wheel turns on again, it moves up and you're on the top. So I do think that it's a waiting game, it's a numbers game, but you have to still be confident and just know that your time will come. But what would you say is the main difference between someone who gets a job and someone who gets rejected?
If we're saying that these two people are applying to the same job, they have the same qualifications, I would say that big difference or small difference is honestly a little bit of luck. And I say that because people take the job search process so personally sometimes. Obviously, you want to be constructive, understand feedback on how you want to get better. But then there are some things that happen behind the scene, whether it's an internal candidate who interviewed for the role or someone who interviewed in the past that got it, or the type of recruiter who was on the rec who knows as much of the position as someone else. Like there are little things that go in the administrative back end process that you have absolutely no control of. And sometimes that's just like the difference in that situation. So I would say be honest with yourself in terms of like trying to get your resume better, trying to get your mock interviews better. But then also, again, like give yourself a little bit of grace because sometimes that like inch of a difference is just something that's truly outside of your hands. And that doesn't have to do with anything about you as a person or your abilities as a professional.
And how much does a unique story come into play when recruiting candidates? Because I know that, and again, going back to one of your posts, and I quote, you said that one of your favorite stories are the idiosyncratic narratives lived by people. And I know that I think everyone has a unique story, whether they believe it or not, but it's hard to articulate that story in a way that is easy to understand. So, do you think that when you're recruiting for candidates, you're looking for someone who can not only articulate their story, but has a good narrative to discuss?
I think it's about one, just being honest with your narrative and communicating that well. It's not a bad thing if you studied computer science and you become a software developer. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I think it's just interesting when people are upfront about things that may be like a little bit outside of the box in terms of their job search. So like when I talk to tech people and we're just kind of small talking at the start of the phone interview and they say their passions about like playing guitar or cooking, it's not just like I like to be on GitHub like after work. Like sometimes people feel like they have to be in this box and like they have to communicate themselves in a way where like all they do is just eat, breathe, like whatever their job is. And like that's not always the case. So when people are like kind of honest about that and open about it, whether it's, small talking in an interview or just like sharing some of your side passions on LinkedIn, that's really cool to see because it really humanizes the applicant. And that's a lot easier to remember than being the type of person who's like, okay, this is a technical role. Like I need to tell them that like outside of work, like I just like to learn new programming languages and code all day. Like if that's not your authentic to you, then don't try to be someone that you're not.
So well, there is a human side to recruiting, as in share your things, your hobbies, your interests outside of work. Share why you're really passionate about it. Don't just say what the other person wants to hear, as in, yeah, I code in the weekends. Yeah, I read strategy books. No, it's actually what you do that makes you tick when you're not at work in your interests.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, recruiting is a little bit like dating. So if you come up to the first date and you lie about everything you like, and then you get into a relationship, it's probably not going to work out, right? So you do have to you want to present your best self, obviously, but then your authentic self because you want to make sure it's a two-way street and it's a match on both sides.
And I saw that on your LinkedIn profile, you have your Myers-Briggs type indicator. And I feel like having that, you're basically telling everyone what your strengths and weaknesses are. And it's really good to understand who you can work well with and who you potentially can have a conflict with. And I think this is very similar with recruiting in that you need to know, and a common question is, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? So do you think maybe taking this test or just doing a deeper dive into your strengths and weaknesses could be an asset going into this competitive recruitment process?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the reason why I got interested in that is that I feel like you have to be really good at whatever your job is if you're trying to find someone who's doing the same thing. Like, actually, no, sorry. Can I start over?
Yeah,
Um,
of course.
so the reason why I got into taking like personality tests is that my job when I was a recruiter is to find the strengths and weaknesses of other people. But if I can't accurately assess that on myself, like how am I supposed to find that in other people? So that's kind of where it started off. And but I think it's so important to know that about yourself when you're job searching. People underestimate the self-reflection piece at the beginning of a job search. And that is the most important thing because if you don't have a really clear idea of who you are, your strengths, your weaknesses, what types of tasks give you energy, what types of tasks are draining, then it just makes it harder for you to find a role that will be completely fulfilling. And people oftentimes when the job search, typically when they're a little stressed, they're either trying to run away from an opportunity or like they're kind of up against a deadline. And I know that's so hard and so stressful, but don't just like apply to a certain role type because everyone else is doing it or because you saw it in like, some BuzzFeed list that it's like really cool to do and just like be one track mind on that role unless you've taken some time to reflect if that's actually a really good fit for you. And to understand what would be a good fit for you, you really have to understand who you are as a professional and like what really makes you fulfilled in a job, and it might not always be what looks good on paper. So I took the Myers-Briggs. That's not the only personality test out there. There's plenty of ones online, and I think playing around with that a little bit and doing just a little bit of reflection in the beginning can pay off at the end when you finally get that offer and you start in a position.
So let's say that you take one of those personality tests, or you do some self-reflection, self-reflecting, or you ask your friends to offer some of what they think are your strengths and weaknesses, and you learn more that you are more of an individual person, and let's say you're more introverted. I feel like most people would think that that's a weakness going into the recruitment process because it's hard to put yourself out there and network and apply if you're more introverted. But I understand that you think that being introverted is a strength. Why is that?
Yeah, I think it's my most powerful strength, to be honest. I think there's a false narrative about introverts being like quiet and passive, but it's just that if you're an introvert, you get your energy differently from other people who get their energy from talking to other people. So as an introvert, for example, with networking, like I just can't do surface level conversations or small talk for too long. Like that drives me crazy. I really want to get into the crux of who this person is and like why they are the way they are. Like that is really what makes me happy. So when I go into networking conversations, for example, I'm definitely the type of person that will um, be able to discover really in-depth things about a professional beyond like what they do and their job and their career path. Like at the end of the conversations, we're always talking about our passion and like why we think tech is the way that it is, where it's going in the future. And like people have really appreciated that I don't just ask surface level questions. As an introvert, I'm someone who really values like really deep relationships. So I don't send out a coffee chat request unless I really see them as someone who could be a potential like professional friend. Like I'm never just like grabbing 30 minutes of someone's time just to like get their time. Like I really like follow up with people. I'll remember little things and communicate that to people long after the coffee chat. So those are just a couple ways being an introvert has helped me a lot in the job search. And that doesn't mean that if you're an extrovert, you can't do those things too. It just means that introverts are built differently and there are different strengths that we have. And instead of thinking that being introvert is a weakness, think about the ways that you find energy and gives you life and apply that to how you're going about your job search process.
I think that's a great way to think about it because, on the surface, it could look like a weakness, but if you actually work on flipping it, making it a strength, you can use it as your advantage. You said it's the biggest strength of yours is being an introvert. I think a very similar example is being a first generation college student. Yes, that could be a weakness because you don't have parents that you can rely on to ask for help, but you know that your skin will be so much thicker over those 4 years because you're gonna have to learn everything on your own. You're gonna have to be as independent as you could be, and that could be part of your story and your narrative. So I think it's so important to, is it really a weakness or can you flip it and make it a strength and be stronger? And kudos to you for being able to realize that and also do that. And you briefly mentioned coffee chats. And I know coffee chats, networking, introductory calls, It's pretty confusing since they're all more or less the same thing with some subtle differences. So what would you say are a few of the best practices for coffee chats to make them super effective?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest one that I'll do two. So one is that you make sure you do enough research about the person that you have substantial questions to ask. Don't ask questions that you could easily find on Google or on their LinkedIn profile, because then what's the point of talking to them if that information is out there? So I would say make sure that you do your research on the person, and in doing so, you'll probably find that to have really good questions, it'll be someone who has a lot in common with you. A lot of people think coffee chats should only be like with recruiters or someone who is hiring for a particular position. But if your only commonality with the person is that like you really want a job and they can hopefully get you a job, that's not substantial enough. So try to find people where you're looking at their profile and they worked on projects that you're interested in. They volunteer at places that you support, things that can go a little bit beneath the surface, because you'll be more prepared with better questions and you'll probably hit it off a lot easier. And then the biggest thing is to follow up. Oftentimes people will just do a coffee chat, have a good 30-minute conversation, never talk to that person again unless they need them for like a job referral. And then that's not really building a connection or a relationship. That's really more just kind of asking someone for a favor, which is not inherently bad, but that's not really the point of networking. So when you're having these coffee chats with people, make sure that you actually follow up with them over time. Like if you learn something new, like tell them that in the conversation. If they shared like a podcast with you, mention that, a few weeks later when you see that podcast advertisement come up, it's kind of like having just professional friends. When you're in a high school or college environment, it's so easy to go up to your friends every single day. But then when you get into the workforce, it's a lot harder, and you stay in touch by these like micro interactions, whether it's just being Facebook friends or like liking people's posts. It doesn't mean that you're like talking to them every day, but when they're just kind of seeing you around in these micro communications, you feel more connected to them. And LinkedIn and professional networking is just like that. So I'd say the biggest takeaway for sure is making sure that you're following up and building a relationship beyond the coffee chat.
No, I think those are two excellent points. Going back to the first one for a second, if you don't research the person beforehand, before you even reach out, you need to draw some similarities, whether it's from the same alma mater, whether it's the same interests, whether that's professional or, outside of the workplace. It's so important to build that rapport. And then also with following up, if, I have a coffee chat with you and I said that I'm really looking to break into tech, and you're like, oh, well, check out this podcast. Right? It shouldn't just end there, but a few days or a few weeks later, when I do check it out, hopefully I should reach back out and say, thank you so much, Lizzie Ann. It was a great podcast. Stay in touch. And you continue that relationship versus making it a transaction. So I absolutely love those 2 points, and everyone out there, make sure you follow up, because if you don't, then you're not going to be remembered. And it's just almost like a waste of both of your time, because you're not showing why you found that conversation to be valuable. And then I want to be respectful of your time, Lizzie Ann. So we'll jump to the last question, final question for today. What would you say is the best piece of advice that you can give to our audience to help them get past the final round interview and land the job offer?
Great question. I would say you want to make sure that you're really present in the interview process. Sometimes people feel like they're just kind of performing and they're just like trying to think of how they can present themselves the best. And that's important. But also make sure you're having a conversation with the other person and like really taking notes, mental notes about what they're talking about. Because one thing that makes a difference at the end is the candidates who are able to send thank you notes that reference very specific things that they heard the interview say in the interview, things that, or like put out ideas about stuff that they talked about during the interview. And it really shows that you're really listening and it was a two-way conversation versus you were just kind of like putting on a performance. And I know that sounds hard to do, like I'm interviewing and then like trying to listen at the same time, but preparation is key for that. So making sure that you do all that preparation so that you're putting yourself in a situation where you're really taking in as much knowledge and information from the other person so that you can be able to communicate that you're really present and that you can really see yourself at the company, and here's why, because you have really good examples from when you were having a conversation with that person.
What an excellent way to finish off the show. Lizzie Ann, you're an absolute inspiration. Your story is remarkable. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story, experience, and insight with our listeners. We really appreciate it.